Hello and welcome to the New York Film Academy Hour. We're both back and we're super excited because we also have a guest making his second appearance to break down all the glorious info on one of the best stars in America, maybe ever, Marlon Brando. Stay tuned to find out more.
Welcome to Popcorn Talk, featuring movie discussion, news, and interviews. Popcorn Talk. We talk movies.
Welcome to the New York Film Academy Hour. I'm Joelle.
And I'm Pega.
And we're so excited because Peter Rayner has graciously joined us back here in the studio to talk about maybe the most prolific legend of all, not prolific, but just great legends of American cinema. The guy who kind of changed it all. If you're here with us the first time, you should definitely go back and check out Peter Rayner's first episode. It was amazing. We get all the information on his history with cinema and his writing history with cinema, and he's got a lot of great information in there. But if you're coming back, get excited because today we're talking about the one, the only Marlon Brando. Peter Rayner's work has appeared in the LA Times and New York Magazine, and he's currently a film critic for the Christian Science Monitor and NPR's Film Week. His latest book is the essay collective Rayner on Film, 30 Years of Film Writing in Turbulent and Transformative Era. Welcome back.
Hi, thanks, Joelle. Hi, Pega.
Hi.
Absolutely. We're so excited that you're here today. I first was introduced to Marlon Brando in when I was in high school. I was concentrating in theater, and they put on A Streetcar Named Desire for us. I was 14, and I remember just being completely floored because I'd never seen anyone take up the screen that way. It was kind of because my idols then were like, Brad Pitt and stuff, and phenomenal actor, but once you know the history, you're like, you're just stealing from Brando. It's incredible. So when you brought up that you wanted to talk about him today, I couldn't have been more excited.
Yeah, no, me too.
So tell us a little bit about, we want to get in, for those who don't know Brando, what would be a good introduction to him? What information should they know first?
Well, I guess if you want to start out with a real bang, then you would probably see A Streetcar Named Desire or On the Waterfront. But, he made about a dozen first-rate movies, I think, in his career. And in most of his performances, even in the bad movies, there's something really going on there. So you kind of can't go wrong. Well, you can if you see The Appaloosa or Night of the Following Day or Morituri or some of those films. But really, I mean, his like you were saying when you opened up today, that there was really nobody at the time or since who really commanded the screen in that way, and he has so many imitators and so many people who came after him who were so greatly influenced by him. Great actors like Pacino and De Niro and many others. That if you look at his films now, you may feel like, well, they're great, but I'm seeing a lot of this now in actors of today, but you really aren't. I mean, not to that extent.
I read a line where Elia Kazan said that he had to restage the play when they were on Broadway because the audience could not take their eyes off of him. And so he had to strategically place him so the audience could still see him and yet not be distracted from the action happening on stage.
Yeah, I mean, he was so... I wasn't alive when he did Streetcar in 47, but I know people who saw that performance. Wow. And even earlier, he had a role in a play called Truckline Cafe. And the critic Pauline Kael wrote about once that she had been taken to see that film with a boyfriend, and there's a scene in the play where he has an epileptic fit. I mean, he just sort of he just sort of comes apart, and she averted her eyes because she thought, this is some actor on stage having a fit, for real. Oh, wow. And the guy said, no, watch this guy, he's acting. I mean, he just had this immediacy on stage that most actors don't have at all. But if they do, it tends to be in the movies, But he never acted again, except for a little thing in Boston years later. He never acted on Broadway again after Streetcar, which is quite amazing, given...
Was that, do you think, for a love of cinema or for a disdain for audiences?
Well, he was such a complicated man that it really, you can't say why he did certain things. I mean, I could read you from the end of an essay that I wrote on.
Yes, please.
But, I mean, just to give you a little taste of I did a big essay in my book, shameless plug, on Brando. when he died, and it was, what I wrote was the 1970s in Hollywood, with all its creative ferment and risk-taking, was tailor-made for Brando. Instead, it was left to his spiritual progeny, Pacino and De Niro and the rest, to carry the torch. Last Tango in Paris was the last leading role Brando would ever play, by choice. Should we have been surprised? After all, he never set foot on stage again after his triumph in Streetcar in 1947. Renunciation for Brando was a form of effrontery. He let it be known that acting, even at its highest level, was, in his words, quote, an empty and useless profession. The gods must have had a good laugh when they created this man. He despised what he did, and no one did it better. So, that's the whole paradox of Brando, is that he was so good at what he did, and yet, on some level, particularly as the years went on, he seemed to have disdain for the profession. And yet, when he wanted to be a real actor, even in those years where he claimed he didn't want to be, he put everything into these roles. There's a very interesting anecdote that I heard from a colleague of mine. Actually directed him in what was essentially the last film he ever made, but wasn't released. He did a voiceover for an animated film. I've written it down somewhere, but anyway, he played an old dowager cat, and so my friend, drove to his palatial home with all the sound equipment and everything, and gets ushered in, and there's Brando, made up to look like a cat with whiskers and rouge and a scarf and the hair and everything. Now he didn't have to do any of this. It was a voiceover.
Sure.
And he wasn't asked to do that. So, when you hear a story like that, you think, well, on some level he must have cared.
Wow.
To get in character like that. So bottom line is he was extremely complicated in terms of how he approached acting, and what he says isn't necessarily what he did. There's a wonderful documentary that came out a year or two ago called "Listen to Me, Marlon," and they found old cassette tapes, audio cassettes that he made. Often, just in the middle of the night, he would just sort of ramble on and stream of consciousness stuff over the years about himself, his acting, and everything like that. And they put it together as a documentary with his voiceover and clips. And it's really fascinating, because he cared a great deal more about a lot of things, including acting, than he let on in public.
I'm going to definitely check the documentary out because I want to know more about Brando, the person. Peggy, you just kind of got into Brando.
I just recently got into Brando. I'm like,
Well,
we're
lucky
doing
you.
a show on Brando. Okay, I'm going to start my research. I saw Godfather for the first time.
Really?
A week ago.
Wow. What's next? E.T.?
Yeah, right now I've seen E.T.
Okay.
But he's so captivating. He's just, I was so drawn. Like it's been a while since I've been so drawn to a character or a person. And then I started watching A Streetcar Named Desire. And even that, I was like, wow, he was so good looking back then.
We actually pulled maybe one of the most famous clips from A Streetcar Named Desire. And I want to take a look at this just because I think that when people think of Marlon Brando, this is the first image they kind of get. This is his sort of introduction to America.
You want to play Streetcar?
Yes.
Hey, Stella! You put that howling down there and go to bed.
Yes, I want my clothes.
How far should pure Alpine spring water?
Whatever.
Oh, we're having a bit of a technical difficulty.
this is the
Commercial
streetcar.
decided that it needed to play in the middle. That's okay. YouTube likes to play with our emotions sometimes. Let's try again. Thank you.
Hey, Stella!
You put that howling down there and go to bed.
Yes, I want my clothes down here.
You shut up. You're gonna get the law, are
Hey,
you?
Stella!
You can't beat on a woman and then call her back, or she ain't gonna come. You're gonna have a baby.
Listen, you
I hope
ass-
they haul you in and turn a file.
Yes, I
love
want
this
my
one.
clothes down here.
You stinker.
Hey, Stella!
I've never been more haunted by a performance than this woman coming down to him. It's so unnerving.
Yeah, she's like in a trance.
Yeah, it's the most unnerving thing.
Mixing this.
It's a great use of her light too, coming in and out of shadows. Using this great, really long staircase.
You don't ever leave me, baby.
Oh man, I love this scene. At one point, you're like, it's horrible, it's awful. And you're like, it's kind of romantic, and then you're like, no, it's definitely abusive. And I feel like that's great cinema, the place that can take you in just a few seconds to a bunch of different emotional points. Do you remember your first time watching this film?
It was in high school, and it was made a big impression.
Yeah.
When he cries out for Stella, that's so iconographic that it sort of entered the main. There was an opera of Streetcar that was done by Andre Previn that I saw at Dorothy Chandler years ago. And before the opera, they had outside a Hey Stella competition.
Oh no!
And they had like people come up and they'd go, Hey Stella, everyone would do it, women too, and then they would give a prize to whoever. I mean, it sort of changed the whole way that people thought about acting, what Brando did. And he studied with Stella Adler, who studied, who did the Stanislavski method, which was a form of method acting, but it wasn't the Strasberg Institute, and there was a lot of bad blood between Brando and Lee Strasberg. He hated Strasberg. He thought he took too much credit for everything, and Stella Adler was very protective.
Both kind of big personalities, right?
I got a letter once from Stella Adler. She had an acting school out here.
Yeah.
And when I wrote about Brando in the film The Freshman, and it was a very touching letter because she said there was no one who was more gifted than he was, but she kind of wondered what happened to him and why he didn't really follow through on all of the greatness that he had in him. But look, he gave many great performances right up until the mid-'70s, when he kind of dropped out again. And some of the best performances that he gave are not well known at all. They're not Streetcar. They're not On the Waterfront. They're not Last Tango. They're Reflections in a Golden Eye, Burn, The Nightcomers, films like that not many people have seen. He played George Lincoln Rockwell, the head of the American Nazi Party in Roots 2 on television. These are all amazing, amazing performances. But when I think the first Brando film I saw was One-Eyed Jacks.
Wow.
I saw it when I was 9 or 10 years old on a ship. I was with my parents going on a trip, and they showed it as one of the movies. And they showed, the Absent-Minded Professor and Son of Flubber and all these movies. And then there's this very dark, methody Western, One-Eyed Jacks, that's there, that was directed by Brando. It was the only
I wasn't aware of that.
Only film he ever directed. He took it over from Stanley Kubrick, who started and didn't work out, so then he ended up directing it.
Is this the same time Kubrick is doing his World War I trench warfare movie? Oh my gosh.
Paths of Glory.
Yeah.
It was a little bit after that.
Okay.
He but Kubrick was still working in Hollywood at that point, and in Spartacus, but it's an amazing film actually, One-Eyed Jacks. He was a marvelous director. Apparently, he was not easy to work with the producers. And,
Say, do
you
we
know,
have any?
Yeah, the
stories?
budget, and he shot all this millions of feet of film, and I mean,
Wow.
I don't know if I would want to be a producer of a film that Brando directed, but in the end, he plays this Kid Rio, this gunslinger, and it was shot up around Monterey, so it's one of the few westerns where you can actually see the ocean, and it's quite an amazing movie. And Carl Malden, who was in Streetcar, was in it as sort of a good guy turned bad guy sheriff, and it's quite a remarkable film.
I wanted to ask you about Streetcar. Now, as you mentioned with the Stella competitions, it's got huge lasting power. Did it have that same impact when it first came out?
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, it was a huge success on Broadway. It was a sold out. He could have played it forever, and everyone who had any ideas about being an actor or director of actors saw that show. And so when he did it on film, 4 or 5 years later, it was already, very, very powerful, and people knew. But it was great that you could have that on film, because it really bugs me that all these legendary performances on stage just kind of disappear. They're not even to this day recorded very much. So you have to sort of take everybody's word for it.
It's true. I also wanted to ask you, the character that Brando plays in this movie, Kowalski, is this really awful kind of guy, and yet he's one of the most celebrated characters in film history. And we've seen this with like Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs, or Bryan Cranston as Walter White in Breaking Bad. And what do you think makes these horrible people kind of so likable, or so? Why do we crave seeing these kinds of men on our screens?
Well, part of it's just human nature. I mean, there is a kind of tropism towards, bad boys, evil. I mean, it's more interesting on film than people who are like really good, bland. It's very hard to play just kind of, good. Tom Hanks can do it, and a few other actors, but it's very hard to play good interestingly.
Right.
But Stanley Kowalski is not. There are levels of I wouldn't say that he's Hannibal Lecter. He is he's a brute, and but Vivian Leigh, the Blanche Dubois character, in a sense is sort of driving him on. I mean, they drive each other crazy, and it's this sort of hothouse environment. Literally, that sets everyone off in that movie and in that play, and I think it's Brando's vulnerability in all of these roles that is the saving grace that I think makes him not just a pure villain in a lot of these instances, because you can see what his conflicts and anger and rage come out of. So you don't have to endorse the way he behaves to understand, but you have to understand it. And I think it's that depth of understanding that he gives you that is so extraordinary in his best performances. It's really the acting equivalent of the insight of a great novelist into character. Most actors, if they're good, they just give you one level and that's it. You're angry, you're sad, you play one level. If you're a very good actor, you can sometimes mix it up. You're angry, but there's a level of sadness underneath it. Brando gives you like 5 levels. They're just all going on at once, and it's so rich and so. That's why it's very hard to describe what he does as an actor without really becoming incredibly complex about the emotions that are on the screen.
Let's take from one of his earliest, most well-known works to one of his later, least known works, Reflections in a Golden Eye, where he's still kind of playing this alpha male, but with something that really surprised me in 1967, he's playing a gay man, and especially for someone of Brando's stature, I know he was kind of going through his toxic phase at this point, but to take on the role and to do it with such grace and honesty, it's a stunning portrayal.
Yeah, it's an amazing performance in a really neglected movie. And when he died, it was criminally not mentioned very much, even in the obits.
Let's take a real quick look at this clip, because it's an incredible performance. For those of you that are just listening, There's not a lot of dialogue here. We just have Brando looking at himself in a mirror.
And a commercial.
And you're definitely going to want to. It's okay.
We're being sabotaged by YouTube. Should you set it up at all? Or
yeah, go ahead. Set it up for us.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have a section on this that I wrote about as well.
There we go.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Why don't you set it up for us?
Brando plays a Major Penderton, who's a military man on a southern army base, and it's based on a Carson McCullers novel. He maybe I should just read a quick thing about it.
Go for it.
Brando could be equally eloquent in roles in which the character's turmoil was deeply, spookily submerged. As Major Penderton in John Huston's Reflections in a Golden Eye, adapted from Carson McCullers' novel, he played a man whose homosexuality is so repressed that it has become an incubus. Trailing the handsome soldier on whom he's fixated, played by Robert Forster, the Major might be sleepwalking. The uncomprehending thrill of this brief, soft pursuit has placed him in a trance. Near the end, when he looks into a mirror and rubs cold cream onto his waxy, immobile face in expectation of his suitor's arrival, the self-hypnosis is horrifyingly complete. So that's a little bit of a background to this
I love
guy
that.
who's... Yep.
All right, let's take a look at Brando performing this. I just see so much Brad Pitt in this performance.
Oh, totally.
Right?
That's all I see right now.
This kind of cocky swagger, talking yourself into believing you're something you're not. The stiffness, it's creepy as hell.
Yeah, no, he's someone who's completely, blocked by his repressions. He just can't deal with how he feels in that setting. It was actually sort of a groundbreaking movie, or would have been if anyone had seen it. It was directed by John Huston,
Yeah.
who's no slouch,
No.
Maltese Falcon, African Queen,
Yeah.
you name it. Treasure of Sierra Madre. It was an extra. Elizabeth Taylor plays his wife.
Mm-hmm.
Brian Keith gives a marvelous performance in it. Julie Harris, great, mostly stage actress, was in it as well. It was a very neglected film.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, did this film have any social implications outside of cinema?
Well, I think subsequently there were gay rights groups that felt that this was a very good movie, because it broke a lot of boundaries at the time when movies were being made, Dr. Dolittle, and there just wasn't a whole lot of stuff like this happening in film, and but because it wasn't a commercial success, it became a sort of underground hit over the years, as opposed to having any real effect at that time.
Brando himself, wasn't he, what do you call it, an activist? Wasn't he sort of involved in...
yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, he rejected an Oscar because he felt that the First Nation people were not being respected within cinema. And he had this great moment where he sent a representative up in his honor, basically to accept his honor, which was violently at the Oscars. It was just, if you guys watch the clip, I love watching old Oscar clips because I live for the Oscars. But the reaction from the crowd is just stunningly loud boos. It felt like it was in Paris.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen things in Paris? If they don't like it, they're very
Right.
vocal about it.
Yes.
It was like that, and I had never seen anything like that in America before.
Yeah, it was. He sent this woman who went by the name Sasheen Littlefeather up to the podium to accept his Oscar for The Godfather. And she read a prepared statement that he made, attacking Hollywood for its treatment of Native Americans, and
Wow, love that.
and apparently, John Wayne had to be restrained, and it created a lot of issues. But it was so Brando to do something like that. The only other actor I think who ever rejected an Oscar was George C. Scott for Patton. They didn't believe that acting should be a competition.
Wow.
But Brando, at that point figured, screw it, but I want to make a statement. So that's what he did.
He used that platform to just get his voice out.
Yeah, he was, I don't want to overscale what his activism was. I think certainly by Hollywood standards, and at that time, it was pretty high. He was very active in the civil rights movement. He marched with Dr. King. He also was very active, in the Native American movement. He wanted to make a movie of Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, which with Gilo Pontecorvo, who was the great director who did Battle of Algiers and directed Brando in Burn, which is a sort of anti-slavery epic. That didn't happen with Brando, but he was very active for much of his senior life in these causes. But it is a phenomenon among actors, especially, that they feel like at a certain point they're not real men if all they do is play act. That they have to get involved in some social cause or political cause. It's much more true of men, I think, than of actresses. But look at Redford and Clooney, and a lot of these guys feel like they're not really contributing if they're just, quote, play acting.
Sean Penn, Leonardo DiCaprio have both gone down that path as well.
Right. So I think it is a phenomenon that hits, actors of a certain bent, and it was certainly true with Brando, with his disdain for acting that was open, to involve himself in these causes.
I wanted to ask you, I hadn't heard of the film until you brought it to the New York Film Academy. What was it about this film that you wanted to share with students, that you wanted to pass on to?
Reflections of Golden Eye?
Yeah.
Well, I just, it's funny. I debated whether showing this or On the Waterfront, because I know a lot of students haven't seen that many of Brando's films in general, and I thought if you show Reflections in the Golden Eye, it's kind of like teaching quantum physics before you've taught addition.
Algebra, yeah.
But I don't know. I just thought I wanted to show a film that I really respected for his performance that wasn't, well known. You can always see On the Waterfront and Streetcar, but a film like this, I think you have to be directed. You have to be directed to. You have to be shown to watch it. So that's kind of why I did it. Also, I had done a documentary on John Huston years ago for the A&E biography series.
Oh, wow.
So I knew a lot about Huston and the background of the film.
Great. You mentioned Waterfront. Let's just dive right into this. This is where Brando wins his first Oscar for this role. This role, but not a Streetcar. What do you think was it typical Oscar thing where they're like, now you've earned it and we can bestow this award on you? Or was there something maybe more advanced? Had he grown a lot in his acting since A Streetcar to On the Waterfront?
No, it's just, I can never quite figure out the Oscars, why they do what they do, and you probably, will lower your IQ if you think too much in those terms. Streetcar, he lost to Humphrey Bogart in The African Queen, and so maybe that was considered a kind of body of work performance for Bogart. It was offbeat, not in character. Maybe they thought that Brando had already done all the work on stage, so why honor somebody for a performance that was essentially already, full by the time it came to the screen. Maybe they were thinking that way. I don't know, but and he was a rebel when he came to Hollywood. It was still very much ruled by Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons and all these gossip columnists. They really wielded a lot of power. And here comes Brando, who doesn't kowtow to any of these people. So they went after him. All these columnists, were attacking him. He didn't care, and it turns out nobody else cared either, and that was the end of them. He would an anecdote I can't say on the air, but I mean, he would show up at parties with a monkey on his shoulder, and
oh my.
he says, "I'm only here because my monkey wants to get ...
Wow.
You know, I mean, he was just completely didn't play by any of the rules, and so that alienated the Hollywood establishment, you know, until they sort of figured out that there's more to this, and we better join his party.
Yeah, is Brando Hollywood's first bad boy?
Ooh. Sounds like it.
Well, Mitchum, actually, I mean, Robert Mitchum, who's undeservedly, I mean, he's a great actor, not in Brando's class, but gave some marvelous performances. He was, you know, he got busted for pot in the 40s. He had a little jail time. You know, I mean, he didn't really. There's a wonderful biography of him, and the title is called "Baby, I Don't Care." You know,
I love that. Yeah. When I was picking out scenes from On the Waterfront, because I knew we were going to have a second to talk about it, I went back and forth. A lot of people do the "I could have been a contender" speech, which is great. Contender.
Right.
Exactly. But I like this scene, and this is the glove improv scene. It is so affectionate and so sweet. And if you haven't seen On the Waterfront, or maybe you're just not familiar with the history of the film, her glove was not supposed to fall. He wasn't supposed to pick it up. This is an improvised moment, and I think that it highlights what a great actor Brando was.
Yeah.
Let's take a look.
Everybody loved Joey. Little kids to the old rummies. Did you know him very well?
Well, you know, he got around.
What did that man mean just now?
Oh, no, don't pay no attention to him. He's drunk, he's falling down, everything. He's just a juice head that hangs around the neighborhood. Don't pay no attention.
I'd better go now.
And you don't have to be afraid of me. I'm not gonna bite you. I guess they don't let you walk with fellas where you've been, huh?
You know how the sisters are.
Yeah. Are you training to be a nun?
It's just a regular college.
What is it?
It's run by the Sisters of St. Anne.
Where is that?
It's in Terrytown.
Is he just listening? She's reaching for her glove, and he's like, "No, I got this now." He completely takes over the scene.
So let the camera roll.
So how often do you get in here?
I haven't been here since last Christmas. We were going to have a Thanksgiving party.
That's nice. What do you do up there? Just, what, study?
I want to be a teacher.
I think this goes back to what you were saying, Peter,
That's
about
very
him
good,
having
you know.
5 different levels in a
Personally,
scene.
I admire
You
Brando.
know,
My
this
brother
conversation
Charlie
could
is
just
very,
be
very
the
guy.
conversation.
Spent
There's a lot of
couple years
information
in
being
college.
given out here, but him taking the glove, him trying it on, and then being just so comfortable in it, I think it brings a lot to the scene that wasn't even written. And I know a lot of actors say that that's always their goal, but it's really hard to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, he could just act in the moment. The drop glove scene was an accident, and you can see him reaching for the glove, and then he takes it and puts it on his hand and starts, you know, doing this.
I love that.
And it's just a great scene. There are 2 great scenes that he has with her. This is one of them, and another is when they're in a bar, and he you know, he's this broken down boxer who threw a fight. You know, he could have been a contender. His brother Rod Steiger is in with the mob, and the mob is taking care of Brando as long as he plays ball with them on the waterfront. And then when he rebels against Johnny Friendly, the Lee J. Cobb, Mr. Big, runs into major trouble. And it's such a great performance that, I mean, there are just no words. But I'll try anyway.
Yeah, what makes it a great performance?
Well, these levels. I mean, the fact that he's. I mean, even in that scene, you can see he's protective in many different ways. He's, you know, when he talks about later on, you know, he says, "I remember seeing you in school. You wore braces and you had your braids," and he says, "You were a real mess." And you know, and look, even Marie Saint is extraordinary in that scene too. She's just a marvelous actress. She won the Oscar, as did Brando, for this movie. It was, I think, her first movie.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, she'd done stage work, but I believe it was her first film.
It's incredible.
And Elia Kazan directed Streetcar and On the Waterfront, and then Viva Zapata, which was before this, another film that he did with Kazan, and it just. I'm no actor, but when you see this movie, it kind of makes you, it's like when you see Astaire dancing, you kind of want to dance, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like you just feel like this is the best way to express your emotion, is somehow to do it through a character that allows you this entire range of feeling. And the part was so well written that it could accommodate everything that he had to give as an actor, which is rare. The problem with most great actors in the movies is that the roles aren't there for them to be as great as they can be, and so you end up saying, "Well, gee, that was really good. Gee, I wish." But there are some actors like Brando in Waterfront and Streetcar and Last Tango, or Olivier in the Shakespeare films, or The Entertainer, where you just see the art raised to its highest level. Olivier is the only actor I would put in Brando's stratosphere, and a very different kind of actor. But people talk about Brando. A lot of his detractors will say, "I just torn T-shirt, mumbler."
Oh, wow.
He had no range. No range. I mean, look at The Godfather. Look at Reflections in a Golden Eye. Look at Streetcar. Look at this. Look at so many of the films that he did. He played Mark Antony in Julius Caesar.
He sure did.
On film. Friends, Romans, Countrymen. He's really good in that film. You talk about versatility. Brando could be Stanley Kowalski, and he could be Mark Antony. Does anyone really want to see John Gielgud as Stanley Kowalski?
No.
No.
I wanted to ask you, I feel like Brando, I'm not sure how he went about selecting his roles, but they always seem to have the pulse on what was going on in the world at the time. Terry Malloy is, down on his luck, trying to kind of come back after this long, hard fight. What do you think, do you know how he picked his roles, and why do you think they kind of resonated with moviegoers?
I think, at least initially, he had an instinct for roles that really captured the strongest aspects of who he was, and that meant that, a certain maverick outlaw quality, a subversiveness in the role itself. Whether he designed it that way or not, I don't know, but he did become kind of the icon for the 50s misfit, the rebel, without a cause. James Dean, who was in the Rebel Without a Cause, was a huge admirer of Brando's and a fanboy, and did everything he could to try to act like Brando, and he was relentless, but Brando was really, I think, part of that whole generation in the 50s that was sort of caught between Korea and Vietnam and the Eisenhower era, breaking out of a lot of conventional strictures of American life, and sort of moving to the margins. And you see what came of that in the late 60s and 70s in the generation of roles played by Pacino and Brando and Jack Nicholson, in Five Easy Pieces, and Dennis Hopper and all of those characters, I think, come out of that sort of Brando essence from the 50s, but you couldn't sustain it into the 60s because society had changed, and in movie terms things have become much more conventional. And in my opinion, the 60s is probably the blandest era for American film, because the studios became very corporatized and they didn't really want to take the kind of chances. And Brando himself, I think, to some extent lost interest, partly because the roles weren't there. Although I do think that, as I mentioned in my book, that it would romanticize Brando's career to say, as many have, that Hollywood done him wrong. That he's another trash genius like Orson Welles or Buster Keaton, who was sort of ruined by the system, and because he could have. Anyone would have written a role for him. Anyone would have directed him in something if he had just asked. And there were actors like Burt Lancaster in the 60s who left Hollywood on occasion to make films in Europe. Burt Lancaster worked with Luchino Visconti in The Leopard, which is a great performance. And, there were actors who went overseas to do the kind of work they felt they couldn't do in Hollywood. And Brando could have done that in a second. Mm-hmm. David Lean, I interviewed David Lean once, and he desperately wanted to work with Brando. He was even wanting to cast him as Lawrence of Arabia. Visconti wanted to make a film of Proust's Remembrance of Things Past with Brando. There's no one who wouldn't have made a movie with him. Among the great auteurs in Europe, Fellini, he didn't want to.
Did Brando do a lot of on-camera interviews in his day?
He did some. He didn't do a whole lot. He did do some talk shows. There's an infamous one that he did with Larry King towards the end of his career. Where, I forget what the occasion was, but it was. And when he did do interviews, it was almost never about acting. He really didn't want to talk about acting. He would talk about Native Americans or civil rights or that kind of thing. He wrote an autobiography. Tons of books were written about him. Some very good ones, including one by Richard Schickel. But he almost never gave interviews where he talked about what he did as an actor. He just didn't want to go there. But he did. The interview with Larry King was really infamous because he ends up planning a big kiss on Larry King.
Oh, wow.
The two of them got along famously, but I don't know what you would call it. It was sort of performance art. John Travolta did a very funny takeoff on that interview, playing Brando on Saturday Night Live.
Oh.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, look that up.
Well, let's close out with a film where I think maybe not everyone knows, but it was sort of a defining moment for Brando's career, which is The Wild One. As you mentioned, Rebel Without a Cause. This is the leather jacket, the greaser-style motorcycle gangs. This is a 1954 film by Laszlo Benedek. Is this how you say his last name? Benedek. And Brando plays the quintessential bad boy, and it's kind of amazing. Let's take a really quick look.
It's Lee Marvin.
He's fabulous. No! Okay.
You do look pale. You been taking care of yourself? You been staying out too late at night?
That's mine, Chino. Take it off. Don't do that.
Yes.
That's better, Johnny.
And that's all the clip we need to see,
I
because
miss
that
you.
verbal exchange right there
Ever since
is
the club split up.
perfection. Just, I love, there's just no falseness in the, don't do that.
Yeah.
It's just, that one little line says so much to me about this character, Johnny Strabler. He is confident, he is really not concerned with the ways of other people, and, don't touch his bike stuff.
Yeah, well, there's a famous line in this movie where he says, "What are you rebelling against?" And he says, "What do you got?" But Brando was a master of underplaying. People always think, Stella, but like in that scene, he says, "Don't do that." I mean, just think of how many actors would have said, "Don't do that."
Right.
He totally underplays it. There's the most famous scene in Waterfront is when he's in the backseat of the cab with Rod Steiger, and his brother pulls out a gun trying to get Brando to play ball with the mob boss, and Brando just looks at and goes wow. When he pulls the gun out, he just goes wow, and that just speaks volumes, the way he reads that line. Only a great actor would have underplayed it in that way. It's like, I'm so disappointed in you, my brother. How could you, whoa, it's come to this. It's beyond being angry. It's like,
just belief almost.
Flummoxed, yeah. But and he does that over and over again as an actor. The Godfather, he could have played it as a really, out there mob chieftain, but he doesn't. He plays it, and
always
you mentioned
so calm.
Do you know how old he was when he was
It's
played
like
that?
48 or something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I mean, he was, and he had to, and he was box office poison when he made that movie. He had to essentially audition for it.
Oh, wow.
You know, Coppola made it look like it wasn't a screen test, but it really was.
Just showed up to his house with like one of the first handheld cameras and did it in his front lawn.
And Brando, you know, he slicked his hair back, he put cotton in his cheeks. He suddenly became this Italian patriarch, and he said it was the most amazing thing. You know, he said his voice, he used that voice. He said, well, he had been shot in the throat, so he would sound like this. You know, he had it all down. And then shortly after, he did Last Tango in Paris, which is maybe his greatest performance. And you know, again, I mean, it was that movie more than any of the others drew so much on his own life, and some of the monologues in it drew from his painful childhood and young adulthood. And that may be one reason why he even says it as much in his autobiography, that he sort of stopped really acting for real after that, you know, except in small roles, because he felt it took too much out of him. It was such a spiritual excavation to do that movie that he just said, I don't need this, you know, and but you know, he was always watchable, even in the worst movies he was in. You know, he's magnetically awful. You know, he's just, you know, but it's just, there's always something going on with him, and that's a real rarity.
We had Linda Goodfriend in here last week talking about her early days with Robin Williams when he was just improvising, and she would say that he would go up and he would either be the most hilarious thing you've ever seen, or it was a complete and total bomb. And I feel like this is a trait we see with a lot of great actors, where what makes them great is their strong choices, and maybe those choices work and maybe they don't, but the dedication and belief and work put into those decisions elevates their performance to the point where at the very least you want to watch them.
Yeah, you know, it's my great regret that I never actually met Brando. I've met a lot of movie stars over the years, but it never worked out for me to meet him. Not that he was that accessible, so, you know. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned Robin Williams. I was at an improv club years ago, and he just showed up for it.
Wow.
You know, he wasn't even part of the improv group. He just liked to work out, like you go to the gym, you know. And so someone made a suggestion from the audience, and it wasn't a plant because it was a friend of mine. He said, pretend you're a poet from India. You know, just read a poem or something. So he on the spot improvises this Hindu epic poem in rhyming couplets.
Wow.
And it was so amazing that on some level it wasn't funny, because it's like, where did this come from? You know. So I mean, there were some performers who were just in another stratosphere, and I don't think it's anything against Brando to say that he couldn't really explain how he did what he did. He shouldn't be expected to. You know, De Niro is notoriously inarticulate. It's what they do that counts, not how they got there and what they say.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for shedding this amazing light on an incredible performer. You guys, if you're interested, and you should be, in reading more of Mr. Rayner's work, please check out his book, Rayner on Film, 30 Years of Film Writing in a Turbulent and Transformative Era. These essays they're just incredible, guys. You can buy the book on Amazon.com. If you want to learn a little bit more about his style, check out his Rotten Tomatoes page, where he's reviewed maybe every movie released in like the last 20
300
years.
movies a year.
It's an incredible stack of knowledge and deep dives into films. And I highly encourage you to check out his work. He's got a very unique perspective. And great, especially in this world where everyone seems to be reviewing movies nowadays. So thank you once again for joining us. Really
my
appreciate
pleasure
having
as
you.
always. Thank you.
Guys, we'll be right back here in studio next week with another super amazing guest. Hopefully we can tweet you guys out about it before next week. But until that time, I've been Joelle Smith.
And I'm Pega.
And we will see you guys here next time on the New York Film Academy Hour. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.
Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire Popcorn Talk Network, we would like to thank you for tuning in. For questions or comments, be sure to visit popcorntalk.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of the Popcorn Talk Network.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Popcorn Talk Network or its owners or principals.